Hi everyone, I'm Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I welcome you to join me in viewing part 2 of my interview with David Lee Hubbard, author of An American 007. You, David, strongly feel that every human being should be extremely worried about these particular alien groups, the reptilians and plasmatics. Why should we Earthlings be worried about them?
Well, I've just outlined exactly why we have to protect our atmosphere from the plasmatics, but the reptilians, literally, and it says it right in the treaty, they want to eat us. They look on us as a food source. It's no wonder they're trying to convince us to eat bugs because we'll taste better to them, just like pigs eating peaches will taste better to us. It is not the normal food for pigs. We're being encouraged to eat insects because that apparently will make us better tasting. They also like our children, I guess, just like we like veal, that hasn't been, you have fats. We don't need any cat family, because it's secondhand fat that we're getting, by carnivores, whereas every animal that we eat is a vegetarian, actually. So they feel the same way about us. They want our diet modified to accommodate them. They'll probably keep a pen of us in underground somewhere where we can be reproducing for food for them. Obviously, that entire scenario did not appeal to Jeffrey and didn't want to participate in its development on our planet, since obviously there must be a deadline with the Greada Treaty, and I feel we're about to see it.
It is your hope, David, and you just mentioned it, that we scrap and renegotiate the Greada Treaty. Should you be involved in those negotiations, what would you delete from it and what would you add to it?
Excellent question. It's really the heart of the issue. As I said, Kathleen Hicks has it at the Pentagon. She's probably got someone reading through it, evaluating it. I'm expecting a call any time from her because I believe that I myself and Kathleen Hicks, being the person to carry the ball for the Pentagon, we can renegotiate that treaty. And it'll be a very short renegotiation. Basically, it's a scrapping that we never should have actually entered into a negotiation in the first place. We should have told them to get off our planet immediately, but we didn't know what we know now. So now that we know that they cannot be on this planet in their wildest dreams, the only way that they have a chance of being on this planet is through this hybridization program. And that's should be the worry, our real worry, because the aliens themselves cannot step foot on our planet without being whisked off to that trial of Gabriel versus Lucifer and the fate worse than death. So that's what's going to happen to all of them, especially if they're still here when Jesus returns, which is imminent.
You, David, have firsthand experience with repurposing alien engineering for use by the Canadian and British militaries. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I've been working with them actually since 1993, where I guess displaying that I was really a mover and shaker. They were keeping track of me, apparently, from when I was first reading the Urantia book in 1977. But 1993, when that happened, they went into full gear. And I started then hearing in my mind lectures about the occult. I'd sit and listen to these lectures, might take an hour or two, and I'd be in my meditation position, which I was taught by Silva Method. And I would listen to this speech that they would give me and then take action. Usually it was a matter of finding documents that I then had to assemble into a book, which I called Coming to Order, the New World Order and the Great White Brotherhood. So I've been working on the New World Order problem since the mid-90s, recognizing that the occult was planning something terrible for us, but it had a lot to do with that Greada Treaty. All of that gets mishmashed together, and obviously an interesting topic for myself and Jeffrey to be talking about over the years as we floated out in his pool every Sunday. That became a real topic of discussion as to how we would possibly deal with these aliens. But as it turns out, if the Pentagon and the Kathleen Hicks takes the ball and works with me on this, we can get them off the planet. I believe I've got a plan that I would lay out for Kathleen Hicks. And I believe that herself and myself, let's say acting almost as an advisor, as a lawyer would, when you would go in, someone presenting a case, you would have legal backing for your position. I would be in a position to offer interplanetary backing. The very first thing we would do is hand them the Urantia book. So we expect to see two of them on the tarmac, just like last time. We'd hand them the Urantia book. They could review it and recognize the fact that this is something that literally lays out the relationship that we have between planets and the fact that we are clearly a planet that is in quarantine and that we cannot have aliens on the planet whatsoever. They would take notice about the fact that they are actually in default, and their attempt to do the non-doable will only lead to them being swept off the planet in one foul swoop, the whole lot of them, and taken to that trial. So they need to be given a heads up. We are the only ones who have anything like a Urantia book, and that is because out of the 4 million worlds in Jesus' local creation, we're the only ones who didn't really get a good firsthand view of what took place compared to all the other planets that saw a three-dimensional representation of every second of Jesus' life on the planet. So whenever Jesus wanted to communicate something, he usually wrote in sand because he knew we didn't have any patent protection, copyright, any of these things weren't in a position. The likelihood would be that we would probably change and manipulate the information based on who was the victor, who was in control, who had the money, all these things. He is described in the Urantia book as a being who is independent of space, but time conditioned. So he can only be at one place, but any time, either future or past. He has a female counterpart that he is betrothed to, literally. We call her the divine minister, and she is independent of space, but time conditioned. So she can be everywhere in her domain. Wherever her mind stretches, that is our domain. That is Nebadon, his Jesus domain. So she is everywhere, but only right now. Just like God, God is only in the present. She is representing the mind of God in that sense. But Jesus, as an independent individual, he can be anywhere in time. So when he stood in the Temple of Solomon, in front of it, in the courtyard of the Temple of Solomon, and saw all the animals being pushed around from the pens because they were being used for animal sacrifice, he reacted so strongly. So there's a number of things that we need corrected, and only a planetary prince like Jesus can correct these. We're well past being able to help ourselves. Whenever I hear these discussions about what can we do, we're so far past being able to deal with any of these issues because all of the power lies in these people's hands. And we are not going to convince them to turn around and change course all of a sudden and embrace God. It's not going to happen. So there needs to be the new broom sweeping clean is just going to be Jesus coming back and setting the record straight. He's going to stop all the technology like voice to skull technology, having a way in which the military can speak into your mind and think that you're hearing the voice of God, when that is literally the most important thing for us to be on this planet. So many of the things that are going on so fly in the face of the reason that we have a planet, to have a first life, to make a choice between God and forsaking him, or God and Lucifer, even worse. All those choices need to be looked at. We need to, on a daily basis, make those decisions to either choose God or forsake him, do the right thing or do the wrong thing. And that's what we're being evaluated all the time by the angels, by the spiritual beings that are here watching our behavior. Because when we go up to the next life in the mansion worlds, they get working on all those, what they call animal vestigial traits, like procrastination, equivocation, problem avoidance. These are the things that we bring from this planet because of our upbringing, but they serve no purpose in the mansion worlds in the spiritual life ahead. So we have a very, I would say, a dark background to attempt to lead a white life. So it's a difficulty, but it's a difficulty that they have a way in which they can help us along, and that's what they attempt to do in the mansion worlds, is to help us through these difficulties that have taken us in dark directions compared to planets that are enlightened life.
What, David, is the origin of the two contracting races and their plans to seize Earth and transform it to accommodate their alien physiologies? Now, previously, you did mention about the atmosphere and air and things like that. Do you know how they're going to go about doing it?
Well, they're having our elites do that. This is why things are so out of control here. There is a connection, obviously, between the elites on this planet who are top level connection with both, let's say, the spiritual realm, which is, in our case, is two individuals named Caligastia and Dalagastia. They are literally the devil. And so they've got connection with them. Satan is no longer on this planet since 1935. And Lucifer was only here once, 2,000 years ago, on the Mount when they tried to tempt. They weren't really tempting Jesus, but they were attempting to tempt Jesus to claim himself as a god of Urantia. But that wasn't going to work. And basically, Jesus looked at them and said, "Satan, get you behind me." And that was literally the end of the Lucifer rebellion. Across the entire system, it actually ended with his words, as our leader, he's given a decision right then and there that he's not going to entertain any of Lucifer's insinuations or suggestions. And consequently, all of the rebels were taken off the planet right then and there, 2,000 years ago. So the only ones who are really here are Caligastia and Dalagastia, and Satan was allowed to be here up until 1935. So beings had been seeing these three beings of light, as they were described in a Masonic document. They described them as stories high beings of light, one male while the other decidedly female. So these are stories high, that's at least 16 feet or more. Beings of light, so they give off light. One male while the other decidedly female. So he's talking about Caligastia and Dalagastia. So the fact is that they, on appearance, must have physical features like we do, breasts and genitals. So they are able to then have sex with each other. That's why the entire thing going on there is always sex. They are pushing in that direction, which is not the direction God wants us to go in. The Urantia Book says that it's not the emotions of an animal that leads us Godward. It's your ideas and your ideals.
Considering the sad state our world is in now and what you know about alien beings and their agenda for us and our planet, how do you suggest governments and individual citizens go forward in dealing with what is facing them?
I think it's beyond us doing anything. I think we just have to allow this to happen, because this has now taken on interplanetary aspects that only can be dealt with by our planetary prince. This is what necessitates his return, because we literally cannot take on the powers that be. It's not possible. Everybody's been compromised. It's an impossible situation. So the best that we can hope for is to survive what's coming up. And what's coming up is what I believe is going to be their planets swinging by, heading out into deep space, having lost their sun. And in fact, I include a photograph in the book showing how their sun, which they call Nemesis, a brown dwarf star, made contact with our sun and is now, or at least was last year, in a 28-day orbit around our sun. So something dramatic just happened to our sun, which is now being hidden. And then the planets like Nibiru that was circling that sun now have no heat source. And now as they pass out into deep space, it'll be just a frozen rock. So they apparently have all vacated those planets. They're in ships right now, motherships, which I have been told are heading this way. So they are not going to be allowed to be on this planet. And that's why we have to renegotiate that treaty immediately, is to let them know that if they show up here, they're going to be fired upon. And Jesus will return and take them to somewhere where they do not want to be. And that's that trial of Gabriel versus Lucifer. When they read the Urantia Book, and there's only one Urantia Book, no one else has gotten a book like that, not on any other planet. So they don't have that information. The Urantia Book spells out very clearly that should there be a disaster on our planet that wipes us out, what they call the salvable population, those who survive that cataclysm, will be taken off the planet. What we have, the term they use, there's a Christian term, but it's not really what happens, what they describe, the rapture, us taken off. But the rapture is actually us being taken to another planet. The Urantia Book spells out exactly what's going on that planet in a paper called Government on a Neighboring Planet. And that shows you exactly what's taking place there and why we would be able to fit into that culture on that planet compared to any other planet. So they say very clearly that in the event of a complete disaster, there is already a planet that has been prepared for our occupation. Now, if we're told that about our planet, that must be true about the plasmatics planet and the reptilians planet. If they are doomed, and those planets are doomed, the salvable population, which is presumably on those motherships, will have a place on a new planet that will accept them and will have all the right features. The plasmatics will be taken to a non-breathing world like a moon. They'll be happy there. These are carefully chosen and prepared planets. So this is spelled out in the Urantia Book, but they don't know that. And the reason they don't know that is because their planetary prince is in rebellion against their own group. So if they're in league with Lucifer, the thing that they would most want to do on behalf of Lucifer is spit in the face of Jesus and his planet, which is our planet, Urantia. So their planetary prince, for both the plasmatics and the reptilians, have not told them of the existence of another planet that they will be taken to. So because they don't have that information, they're desperate to come onto our planet. They think that they have no other choice. But they have another choice. They just haven't been told the other choice because they have a planetary prince who is in league with Lucifer and doesn't want that information known. They would rather their group attack us and attack Jesus on our world. That's really the problem. The renegotiation would entail giving them the Urantia book, having them absorb that information, and then telling them they've got to go above their planetary prince. There's Melchizedek's, there's the Most Highs of Adentia, there are other groups they can turn to and ask, in fact, where is that planet? They're in a ship, they're ready to go there. And if they can be told that information, they will cease trying to attack us, knowing that they would all be wiped out anyway if they were to attempt that. And they have actually a perfect spot located and ready for them. So they just need the good news. This is the good news by Jesus, the creator of this local universe, that he loves that group just as much as he loves us, and that they provided for them. But their planetary prince has kept that information from them. And that has to be straightened out so that once they find that out, they're going to willingly leave, as opposed to having a war of the worlds. We're in more serious shape because that, unless that's renegotiated and that position is made, we're in a very bad position because now we see that they've made hybrids, and hybrids that are very successful being on our planet. Patrick Flanagan was an incredible man. Even though he was a half-breed, he was an incredible individual, incredible human, and did wonderful things while he was here. But we can't necessarily say that that's going to be true for the hybrids that they've created through hybridization and cloning. We don't know what that can represent. Maybe that's what the War of the Worlds will be about. Maybe they're going to be in attack ships, these hybrids, knowing that they can land and they can start shooting us because they aren't going to be taken off the planet, as proved by Dr. Flanagan. So these are the worries. These are why we have to renegotiate and let them know. We have to pass them our Urantia book so they have the details of how interplanetary relations take place and the fact that we're in quarantine and that their mission to move here is ill-fated.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy an American 007, The Double Life of Jeffrey Liu, musical and fine arts mogul, CIA secret agent with a license to kill, how can they do that?
Because the end is so close, my interest is not making money on selling books. My interest is getting that information out. So to that end, I have created an internet site called anamerican007.com, all one word. And when you go to that site, you'll be able to scroll down and read my backstory, read all of that information. There's a free link that you can download either onto a smartphone or onto your computer, which will give you my entire book in color. If you want to go ahead and buy a book, which I would still encourage you to have, it's a keepsake, especially the hardcover in color. I've worked very hard because there's lots of artwork and lots of interesting things in that book. That can be had on the third link there, which is a link to Amazon, where you can go ahead and purchase a book on Amazon.
David Lee Hubbard, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. I enjoyed yakking with you and wish you success in your effort to getting the word out to the masses about what you write about in your book.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
I wish you good luck again. Good talking with you. And we'll see what the future holds.
Ask me back anytime. You're an excellent interviewer. I appreciate the fact that you read the book and had just the right questions.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.